Hi, kids. Welcome to HartsLight Kids, where kids shine bright. Guess what time it is? It's story time! Yay! I see a book right over there, one of my favorite authors. And we are going to get to learn today more about Twigs' escapades and what she's up to now that she's no longer in Fairy Forest. Let's find out. Welcome, Charlotte, and I am so delighted to find out what's happening in the next 2 chapters.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, last week we found out that Twigs thought life couldn't get any worse. She's been thrown out of Fairy Forest. She doesn't have her wings anymore. She's being forced to walk on her own 2 feet. And just when she thinks it can't get any worse, she goes and falls down a big hole. So she literally has hit rock bottom. And it was only the stars through the night that made her realize actually there was hope and she should keep going. So she got over her little depression, her little self-torture almost, and said, no, I can do this. I can make things better. I'm going to get out of this hole and things are going to get better again. So that's where we have found her. Her spirits have risen. She's feeling determined, and on we go. So chapter 10 is called, doesn't sound good, Feathered Foes. Passing a pretty clear stream, Twigs drank her fill and then searched for something to eat. By the base of an ancient alder tree, she soon spotted some speckled brown mushrooms. Picking one and tearing chunks off it, she found it to be rubbery in texture and nutty in taste. Stuffing some more pieces into her bag as snacks for later, Twigs then returned to the path and continued on her way. For hours she walked until her aching feet begged her to stop and rest. She found a smooth mossy stone on which to sit while she devoured a few more of the mushroom chunks she had collected earlier in the day. As she sat there nibbling away, she heard a strange screeching noise coming from above as a shadow flickered over her body. When she glanced up, all she could see was the thick canopy of the trees, so she couldn't identify what was making the sound. Twigs strained to catch sight of whatever creature it was, as movement in the canopy caught her eye. Then her heart missed a beat and she froze. A large bird burst through the dappled foliage, heading straight for her.
Whoa!
I know, right?
That's a big bird.
It certainly is, with some very sharp talons and a pretty sharp beak. On its descent, she registered that it was a beautiful creature. The front of its body had white feathers with light grey horizontal bars on them. Its large, fierce head was also grey, with a razor-sharp, black-hooked beak, and it had broad and impressive wings. The fairy was so transfixed by the beauty and stealth of this creature that she was almost too late in realising that its penetrating, deep orange eyes were glaring right at her. As it reached out to grab her, Twigs came to her senses and instinctively fell backwards off the stone, missing the bird's sharp talons, which scratched the very place where she'd just been sitting. The disappointed raptor emitted a frustrated screech as it swooped up again, circling above to prepare for another attack. Twigs ran. She zigzagged through the trees as she had in her last woodland chase. She'd never seen such a large bird navigate woodland trunks adeptly before, so she hoped the same would be true of this one. How wrong she was. This stunning but deadly predator seemed to be an expert in weaving through the obstacles, and it was gaining on her. She desperately tried to discover a rabbit burrow or even a rat hole for all she cared, but she couldn't see any as she crashed through brambles and ferns, nettles and shrubs. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the lethal talons extending once more, preparing to clasp her and never let go while she still had breath in her body. Unwittingly, she imagined what would happen next. No doubt it would carry her back to its nest and consume her there. Or maybe it would just see her as a mere snack and devour her mid-flight. Her blood ran cold, and she gave one last desperate push forward, clamping her eyes shut as she waited for the inevitable. This probably saved her life, for she didn't see the large pebble in her way, and she tripped, crashing face down onto the ground. A blood-curdling scream caused her to open her eyes, as she believed for a brief second that she was making the dreadful noise. However, Through blurry vision, she saw that the bird's talons were now clasped on an unfortunate young rabbit buck that had been scuttled out of the undergrowth by Twigs's frantic and noisy escape. The poor, doomed animal screamed again in anguish when it was lifted wriggling into the air. Its beautiful eyes were wide open, and the terror it felt was clear to see. Twigs sobbed as she squeezed her eyes shut and tried to erase what she'd just witnessed. If only she could have shut her ears too, but the poor animal's piercing cries were still audible long after it had been carried out of sight and high into the skies above. "I'm sorry, but thank you," Twigs murmured, wiping away tears. It wasn't pleasant seeing another creature being taken for a meal, but even so, she was thankful that the rabbit had proven a better choice for the predator in the end.
Whoa,
Deary,
that was a
deary,
close
deary.
escape.
A very
Oh,
close
boy.
escape. Now, chapter 11, danger lurking in the dark.
Whoa, she just goes from the frying pan to the fire, it sounds like.
She really does. She really does. It took a little while for Twigs's vision to clear, and even then her head continued to pound. She had dragged herself under a nearby bush and lain there to recover, reproaching her own arrogance and foolishness in believing that she was invincible. That was twice now she'd almost got herself killed, and in quite a short amount of time too. Reaching up to check her tender face, she realised that a lattice of scratches now covered it, and its sticky texture let her know that there was a fair amount of blood even before she looked at her fingertips. Groaning and feeling pretty rubbish, she crawled out from under the shrub and pulled herself to her feet. Walking onward, she focused intently on listening for noises that might signal danger. It was exhausting. When she heard a merry trickling sound, she sped up in anticipation. Round the next corner of the path, she was delighted to see a little brook winding its way through the undergrowth. Rushing over to it as quickly as her throbbing head would allow, she knelt at its bank and cupped her hands to rinse her wounded face. Then she drank deeply. How sweet it tasted! Once her thirst was quenched, she peeled off a strip of moss from a nearby rotting log and dipped it into the cool water. Lying on her back, she placed the sodden moss over her forehead to ease the ache, and she closed her eyes. Bliss. Twigs remained like this for some time, allowing the coolness of her compress to work its magic. Once there was no chill left in the moss, she sat back up and looked around, seeking a specific tree. There, downstream a bit and on the next bend of the tributary, grew a beautiful willow tree, stretching its branches over the surface of the water. Ducks, oblivious to Twigs's presence, quacked with boisterous friendliness at each other as they swam between the willow stems, sharing the news of their day. Picking up a shard of flint, she made her way to the willow and carefully sliced off a small section of its bark, the width and length of her middle finger. After filling up on the last of the mushrooms she'd picked earlier, she then popped one end of the harvested willow bark into her mouth and began to chew. Twigs hoped this ancient remedy for headaches was more than an old wives' tale. Looking up at the sky, she could tell that the day was drawing to a close, so she had a choice to make. Should she find a nook to crawl into for the night? Or should she keep on going because she'd already wasted so much time recovering from the bird attack? Which do you think she chose to do? She decided to keep on going, as it wouldn't be much farther until she reached somebody who could help. Into the night she trekked. The full moon beamed down upon her as she ventured along the winding pathways, so she wasn't in total darkness. She crept forward, reassuring herself that the rustling nearby was a hedgehog searching for worms or a rabbit nibbling some shoots, and that she was just jumpy because of the scary bird earlier. At one point, she thought she heard the buzzing of a bee nearby, but she decided that was impossible, for no bee had any business this far into the forest at this time of night. Her mind must be playing tricks on her. She gazed up at shadowy tree trunks as she passed, wondering if it would be more prudent to try and spot another cosy hollow to spend the night in, like she had done with the squirrel. She could have done with the warmth and security of its fuzzy tail right about now. Then she froze. She knew she hadn't imagined that, the sharp snapping of a twig nearby. Her pace increased as her flight mode kicked in. She tried to stay calm. I must be the unluckiest fairy in the realm, she whimpered to herself, trying to fight the panicky tears that were threatening to fall. If she kept going and was quiet about it, then maybe whatever was out there snapping twigs wouldn't notice her and she'd be safe. Snap. Closer this time. Well, it can't be a hedgehog, as a hedgehog wouldn't be following me or keeping up with me at this pace, she reasoned. Maybe it's a badger. I could climb a tree to get away from that. But what if it's not a badger? What if it's something that wants to eat me again and it can climb trees? Twigs started to run to gauge whether the thing was actually following her or if she was being irrational. As the nearby rustling kept up with her, she started to sprint. Snap. Ahead of her this time, just to her left. She was in no doubt now. And it was pointless running, as she obviously couldn't outrun whatever it was. Digging deep into her emotional reserve, she stopped and turned to face the direction of the noise, albeit with her heart doing its very best to jump out of her chest. She didn't breathe. She didn't move. She didn't think of anything other than what could have been making that noise. And then, in the shadow of the trees, as her pursuer stepped forward, the moonlight reflected off two enormous eyes that were staring straight at her.
Whoa, big eyes.
Twigs, Twigs, Twigs. Should have stayed in fairy forest and been a good fairy. She should have been a good fairy.
You'd be asleep in your little hollow in fairy forest.
Exactly, but no, she was stubborn, she was selfish, she was feisty, she was rebellious, she was arrogant, and now look what's happened.
And now she's staring down those two big old eyes.
In the dark.
Oh my
yes.
goodness.
How is she going to get herself out of this predicament? I do not know. Well, I do actually.
Next week?
Next week, you'll have to find out next week.
Not next week. We have to wait a whole week.
You do, I'm afraid.
All right, boys and girls, we'll wait a whole week. But boy, that's going to be a long week till we find out what happens to Twigs. Who has big eyes like that? Next week, we get to find out.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for sharing another 2 chapters of your book on HartsLight Kids, where
Thank
kids
you so
shine
much.
bright. Awesome.
Take care.
You boys and girls have a good week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.